Hello and welcome into the Monday, August 15th version of the Fantasy Focus Football Podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by Geico. Switch to Geico and see all the ways that you can save. My name is Daniel Dopp. I am joined by Field Yates and Liz Loza in studio for the first time. Liz, how you doing?
I am great. I just got some chills. Excited to be here right in the middle of this fantasy sandwich. My goodness, it's great.
We have a lot to get to for the football side in just a second here, Liz, but be honest with you. Like when you got this, you get this offer and you sign a deal with ESPN, you're probably envisioning like this glamorous walk into this studio. It's got red carpets outside of it and like someone's offering you a beverage and treats. Then you come to the bunker. I'm surprised you found it. And you got here before any of us.
Yeah,
I was impressed.
I was guided.
to
Somebody
the
took me
bunker.
along. Mostly I'm just looking for some water.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's so good.
Great.
Useful.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. It's so good to have you, not just at ESPN, but here in studio today because we have the Fantasy Marathon, which it kicks off today, 7 p.m. Eastern time.
So many things, Field. What do people have on tap for them if they want to get into the Fantasy Marathon, both today and tomorrow? Because there is so much on the books for us.
Okay, so turn on ESPN, 7 p.m. Eastern time. ESPN 1. We got the call up. We have been promoted from the Triple Leagues. I'm not sure.
I don't know what the
is.
Triple Leagues are.
AAA is no longer our home. We're moving to ESPN 1 tonight, regular old ESPN, 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern time. It's going to be a Fantasy Football Now branded show. We're going to talk about everything you need to know. You can also watch on the ESPN app, of course, and we're going to keep rolling all the way until 11 p.m. tomorrow night. The concluding event, as always, is a draft. We've got 10 experts with us. It'll be a ton of fun. Looking forward to 28-ish hours of content. And if you have not paid a single bit of attention to fantasy football over the past 7 months, first of all, I'm sorry because you're missing out a lot of fun.
Yep.
But second of all, this is your chance to get caught up in a hurry.
Absolutely. We have so much stuff that we're going to get out over the next 2 days. And we're going to do podcasts. Field, normally we don't do podcasts both days over the marathon because we have such busy schedules, but we're doing a podcast today and tomorrow. So we will back tomorrow as well. But we are going to dive into strategy. We've been doing Double Trouble. We've been talking about teams, what it is that we like from different teams, the different fantasy outlooks that we have for people. But today we are talking about fantasy draft strategy to help everybody get prepared for, I think, the biggest day of their fantasy season, and that's draft day. So without further ado, before we get into that, we're going to talk about some news that happened over the weekend.
Yeah, good call, Daniel, because we had a busy weekend on the preseason front. Every team in action this past weekend. It was not exactly a bunch of regulars that were out there, but enough things happened that we felt it was important to share with you. Again, maybe you're on vacation right now. Maybe you don't find yourself on like a beautiful August Sunday watching Vikings Raiders. You have better things to do with your life. But that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
We're here to sift through the stuff and find out what matters.
All right, so here's going to be my first question. We saw Elijah Mitchell is going to be out for the rest of the preseason with a hamstring injury. Field. He is the de facto number one in that backfield, but there are a lot of running backs behind him. Tyrion Davis-Price, JaMychal Hasty, Jeff Wilson Jr., a whole bunch of names. Curious, with him being out, does anybody else move up the fantasy radar because of this?
Well, I think it probably underlines just how important it would be to have a backup 49ers running back, maybe late in your draft. But I also think there's a few things here. Adam Schefter reported he's out for the entirety of preseason with a hamstring injury. So it's bad enough that he's not going to play at all in the preseason. He's going to be out for the entirety of the preseason. It gives you a little bit of caution when you come into the season, when you come into the regular season and you have been out for potentially 3 or 4 weeks straight and you're a hamstring injury and you're a running back. Like, this has me a bit more nervous about Elijah Mitchell. I have not yet adjusted my rankings in a dramatic way, but I can tell you that as we are sorting through those options of low-end RB2s or potential top-end flex plays, all of a sudden I feel a little bit less secure in Elijah Mitchell. Now, we've seen guys at this spot get hurt late in the preseason, like Austin Eckler last year, and be fine in week 1 and kill it all season. But generally speaking, you have to err on a little bit of a side of caution here. Here's the trick, though, Liz, is if you want to say, all right, so if you're drafting Elijah Mitchell, you also need to draft Tyrion Davis-Price or Trey Sermon, or knowing Kyle Shanahan, there's probably an undrafted rookie on this roster that I've literally never heard of who is already impressing and could get like 14 carries in a game for them at some point this season.
Or maybe a guy named Deebo Samuel. Let's not forget that he exists as well. He knows how to run the football every once in a while.
Yeah, but he's not going to run it that much this year. Not with TDP adding some insurance. And here's the thing. Is Elijah Mitchell probably going to miss time this year? Yeah, he missed 5 games last year due to like a myriad of injuries, ribs, a concussion, a thumb, right? I think he had a finger issue
he had
as well.
knee late in the year that also kind of got it for multiple weeks.
But Kyle, what do we know about Kyle Shanahan? We know that he cannot help himself. This is a man who has a type. And when he has a type, no matter how much load management he would like to employ, he cannot miss. After the 3 weeks that Elijah Mitchell missed later in the season, he came back and carried the ball 21 times. He had double-digit carries for the rest of the year. Kyle Shanahan can't. And also in that return, Jeff Wilson, 0 carries in Elijah Mitchell's return. So I think TDP is frankly more of a Jeff Wilson insurance policy, maybe a little bit of a Deebo Samuel insurance policy, not a 1-for-1 with Elijah Mitchell. Kyle Shanahan also, let's remember 2018 when he saw Jerick McKinnon broke the bank, the biggest free agency acquisition. He has a type. He cannot help himself. If Elijah Mitchell is on the field and available, he is going to manage double-digit carries. I'm not worried running backs get hurt.
All right, we're going to keep watching these 49ers running backs as the preseason shakes out, just to see if anything happens, especially with Elijah Mitchell sidelined, see if someone really pops here. Another person that got banged up over the weekend, Liz, was Drake London. Left the game with a knee injury. Right now, if you're drafting Drake London, you're getting him in the 10th round around people like Rashad Bateman, Alan Lazard, Christian Kirk. Curious, getting banged up a little bit. Doesn't seem to be serious, but knowing where you're going to have to take Drake London, anything from this for you from a fantasy perspective?
Listen, I know it's nothing, and I know, Field, you're really, really high on London, and you should be. I mean, he was an absolute standout at USC, but let's remember that on Halloween, he did hurt his ankle, and it wasn't just any ankle injury, right? Like, he missed the combine because of rehabbing that ankle, and then he missed his first pro day because the ankle just still wasn't right. And whether that was strategy and playing the game and how much, where he was going to get drafted might be part of that equation, but it gives me pause, particularly because he's a rookie and he's missing reps. And also, when rookies often talk about their first year in the league, they hit that rookie plateau, right? It's a longer season because of the NFL draft season. So I am a little bit worried. And he's also attached to a quarterback that I don't think is going to drag him into production, is not like a fantastic distributor. So I would rather have Alan Lazard, who I know you are high on, in the later rounds.
Yep.
And to me, if I look at that, even though Lazard has not like put it together and done the thing we wanted to do, I'd rather have a receiver attached to Aaron Rodgers than a potentially banged up rookie attached to Marcus Mariota / Desmond Ridder.
Does nothing for me. I feel the same. I feel the same as I did. This could be as simple as he comes off and like someone kicked him in the shin or kicked him in the knee and he got like a funny bone. A
Charlie horse.
Charlie horse, you name it. Yeah. And they're like, dude, you're the 8th overall pick. You're the brightest star in our offense, not named Kyle Pitts.
We're going to take it easy.
Just go put on some tennis shoes or whatever and a baseball cap. Like, you're done for the rest of the night. So that's the thing. I wanted to mention it just to pass along the news that the update was that it's not serious, because for a minute, you immediately assume the worst when a guy leaves the game, especially early on in the preseason.
Yeah. Speaking of a guy leaving the game early on in the preseason, we saw Zach Wilson field. Ended up go down with a non-contact injury. Yeah,
non-contact knee injury. He's going to be out likely 2 to 4 weeks, according to the Jets. It's not an ACL.
I don't want to say does this mean anything from a fantasy perspective, because I don't want to, talk about Zach Wilson like that. Obviously, it's serious whenever someone gets hurt. But from a fantasy perspective, if Zach Wilson gets hurt, we're not drafting him as a QB1 in a 10-team league. And I don't know as though you would really see a big difference in his skill position players with someone else under center, would you?
No, I would agree. Joe Flacco is the next man up right now. Robert Saleh recently was heaping praise on Joe Flacco prior to the Zach Wilson injury. No, it doesn't mean anything. Maybe a little bit. Certainly, I think you'd prefer Zach Wilson, but we're not talking about a dramatic fall off in terms of the passing game production. As a matter of fact, last year, weirdly enough, the Jets offense was way more effective for fantasy when other quarterbacks besides Zach Wilson were on the field. Josh Johnson and Mike White both had massive 400-yard games. Zach Wilson never came close. So Zach's going to have a bright future in this league. Looking forward to seeing him back on the field. But as far as the Elijah Moore and the Garrett Wilson and the Corey Davis drafters out there are concerned, does not mean anything for me as far as how I'm ranking these players.
Okay. We're going to talk about some good things over the weekend now, too, real quickly before we talk strategy. And George Pickens, guy that slid down the draft board, ended up, I think, first-round talent, a lot of people said, right? And the Steelers really, it looks like he found someone 3 catches, 43 yards, and a touchdown pass from Kenny Pickett, who also looked really good in this game.
He did.
Curious if anything from George Pickens.
You're not curious.
I'm not curious.
You're not
You're right,
curious.
Field.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm not curious.
Yeah.
George Pickens.
Yeah.
I think that he has worked his way into I'm going to take a shot at him late in drafts, kind of a spot. He's a late wide receiver flyer. You guys feel the same? Are you not taking a shot on him? Is he higher than that for you?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. The Steelers have an incredible track record of developing wide receivers, especially guys not drafted in the first round. Worth noting that when he was playing, Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson were nowhere to be seen. Najee Harris as well, Pat Freiermuth as well. So he's not quite firmly entrenched as like going to play every single down.
Sure.
But super talented. And we have seen the Steelers do two things really well. Draft and develop wideouts, and also part ways with wideouts when the timing was right, which leads to more opportunity for others. So Pickens is certainly in that late round flyer mix now. I mean, he probably could have already have been there because he was a talented guy coming out of Georgia, but this performance only gave you more confidence in that stance.
Yeah.
I love that you use the word develop. I think that is absolutely correct. And we know, to me, I've seen a lot, on Twitter, like this George Pickens breakout, right? Can that affect Deontay Johnson? There's obviously been a lot of negative buzz around Deontay Johnson in fantasy circles because of the hip flexor issue and getting paid late and the quarterback attachment. I think that the Pickens addition means more for Chase Claypool than it does for Deontay Johnson,
I would
who
agree.
I expect to continue as the team's wide receiver one regardless. It is nice to see Kenny Pickett, though.
Yeah.
The Steelers' schedule, though, from jump, really tough. So they face the Bengals, right, in week 1. Odds are not in their favor. They're the heavy underdog. But I have to imagine that it's nice. This is a nice confidence builder for Kenny Pickett, but he's not going to see the field until the first 6 weeks are through because that opening schedule for the Steelers is rough.
All right, one more real quick one. Kansas City's backfield feels like a full-blown committee, Liz. When you see what it is that, how is it that you're attacking this team? CEH, Jerick McKinnon, Isaiah Pacheco, Ronald Jones, do you feel confident in any one of these guys based on what you saw after the first preseason game?
I mean, my fears are allied that I was not completely bad at my job to know that Ronald Jones is on the roster bubble. Like everything I saw before is not somehow a mirage, and Andy Reid is going to sprinkle some magic pixie dust on Ronald Jones and make him not a liability in the red area of the field. So I think this is shaping up to be, yes, a committee. It also clarifies for me questions about CEH, which can continue to be asked, right? Like CEH, 2 goal line touches. Now he was hurt, right? But 2 goal line touches last season when Darrell Williams managed I think double 14 goal line carries. So this to me is shaping up to be similar to what it was last year, but a different distribution. And for the meantime, the Pacheco buzz is absolutely adding helium to his ADP. So I don't know if I'm going to bite right now. I got to see when I start drafting, but I appreciate that it's at least clarifying the Clyde Edwards-Helaire piece.
It's not often, but there are instances where a really good offense does not produce a consistent fantasy star at the running back spot, and this feels like it could be where this one is heading. CEH is still going right around RB30 in drafts, and that's about where he is ranked. But my confidence in that wanes pretty much every day that goes through training camp because the path to him being a really useful player in fantasy would be one of 3 things, I would think. Ton of carries. Well, he had 0 games. He had 1 game last year with at least 15 carries. Sounds like it's even less likely to happen this year. Ton of catches. Again, if you have a committee, less likely to happen this year. And then as Liz noted, his goal line work was very, very minimal last season. So I'm having a harder time. I will draft any player. There's no player that I will not draft, but I'm having a hard time finding the right spot for CEH. Maybe he just proves me wrong because he's just a talented enough player. I loved him coming out of LSU, but he's a hard one for me to size up right now going into the season.
Heck yeah, I'm with you there. Let's talk about some draft strategy. Seeing as how sometimes it's difficult to figure out who you want to take, what you want to do. Here's the deal. I've done 175 best ball drafts so far this year.
Literally 175?
Yeah, literally. More than 175 plus. So I know where I love drafting from. I have done enough to feel like I know when I'm getting into a draft, do I want a top 5 pick? Do I want to be at the turn at the back end of the first round? But I'm going to ask you guys, Liz, I'm going to start with you. Within the drafts that you've done, mock drafts, best ball, real drafts, have you found a spot that you really like drafting from so far this year?
I like 8-ish.
8-ish.
I don't want to have to answer which of these running backs after Jonathan Taylor do I take before the 5 spot. And I really don't want to, I also don't want to draft Cooper Kupp, not because I just know I'm going to do that, right? There's no guessing in there. I feel like the first 6 picks for the most part are pretty concrete. There's not really much deviation from them. So I appreciate a spot where I can maybe have a little bit more control, a little bit more freedom. I'd like to grab like a Stephon Diggs or a Devontae Adams and start strong at wide receiver at the back half of my first round.
So I think, and not to just state the obvious, but I like pick one.
Sure.
We have plenty of research, and we've referenced this recently on the show, that shows that the greatest percentage of championships is won when you have the first overall pick, and it descends from there. 2 is next, 3, on and on and on. So I do like 1. I would say this year, I certainly feel as though there is a clear, at least to me, there are 4, maybe 5 players that I feel most strong about in an elite tier almost unto themselves. Jonathan Taylor, Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey, Cooper Kupp, maybe Justin Jefferson creeps in there, but you could easily make the case for Jamar Chase being a part of that. And maybe you feel as though you need to also have Derrick Henry in there. Maybe you need to also have Najee Harris. So I'm not averse to any, but I would say the closer I am to 1, generally speaking, the better.
Yeah. I think I like being towards the back end of the first round, if I'm being honest. I love that turn spot.
Okay.
I love being able to get, I know, and listen, it's great to get a Jonathan Taylor, an Austin Eckler, a CMC, but to your point, Liz, I don't love being put at that spot where am I taking one of these top running backs or a Justin Jefferson or a Cooper Kupp? And when you take that out of the equation, I got Najee Harris and Dalvin Cook and Joe Mixon and DeAndre Swift at that turn, all staring me in the face with a wide receiver on the other end of that pick. So I like that second half of the first round.
That's fine. I think the one thing that I would say is, and this applies to a lot of years, I think this year is not an exception, is that there are probably somewhere between like 20 and 25 guys that I consider like blue chip elite fantasy football players this season. And if you have the first overall pick in a 10-team league, you're getting 3 of the top 21 players right on your board.
Sure.
If you have pick 9, you're not getting that, that third pick, right, comes at pick 29 in the draft. So at some point there is a dip. There's a fall off from that elite initial tier. And the closer you are to 1, the more likely you are to have the highest number of players within that tier.
Field is, I was like, what's 3 times 27? Hold on, 29.
Not my strength. Yeah, we figured it out,
holy
right?
Cow, first day on the job, don't have
81.
a calculator.
That's so
oh my
good.
gosh, where's my TI 83?
I love it.
That's a throwback. Do
1998.
they still make those?
No.
I don't know.
I'm going to say no. I can't imagine.
I'm
what
sure they do.
Oh, we have
I'm
iPhones.
sure they
Yeah,
do.
why do I don't
they
need a
gotta have, but like we
TI-83
can't do
from that
like,
standpoint.
weird, crazy multiplication and all that. So anyways, yeah. Do you feel like your best ball drafts help you though? Like it's a very different game from redraft.
Totally
for
different.
10-team
Yeah.
PPR league. So
I think the way that I take away the things that I have found in my best ball drafts, understanding they are very different than redraft leagues, is being able to do enough drafting that I'm watching the board come to me. I'm understanding how to pivot when the right thing happens. I'm able to see what happens when I go this person here, and then I decide I want to go a different position later. While it's not the same scoring or strategy from that standpoint, there is something about being in that live draft environment that I just really love, being able to see where are people falling, how does it work, and how do I change my draft strategy if the right guy falls to me.
All right, so let's talk.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Liz.
I was just going to say it also helps me solidify which of the upside players, which ceiling players I am most attracted to.
Yeah.
Like, who am I going to target? Which of these George Pickens-esque guys am I like, yep, that's my flyer.
That's the one I'm taking.
planting my flag. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
So the next part of this is not just where do you like to draft, but how does your strategy change if it's not your choice, but rather it's randomly drawn or it's based off of, the inverse or reverse of standings from the prior year, if it's the same group of people playing in that league, and how things change whether you're drafting, let's say, at 2 versus 9 in the 10-team league. Is there anything that stands out to you, Liz, if you're drafting at 2 versus 9 that's a material change in your strategy?
Well, I think you have to decide if you are going to, especially if you're drafting at the top half of a draft, if you're going to stick with the robust running back strategy or pivot to a 0 RB strategy, or what I like to do is lean on like an anchor running back strategy. So like one running back, load up on wide receiving talent, especially in a PPR format, and then flirt a little bit with some of that RB2 dead zone. I'm not afraid of the dead zone. Let's go waiting. Let's go figure it out. Let's find our guys. Like that's part of this process.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, just deciding what you're going to do about the running back position and, the shrinkage of available workhorses.
Go ahead, Field.
I was going to say, no, I'll leave it there. My cousin just texted me, by the way. They may still make TI 83 pluses.
Do they?
Yeah, and they're still very much in business. But
Is that Griffey?
Yeah, Griffey.
Yeah, of course he did.
Loves it.
Shout out
every day.
Griffey.
Shout out Griffey is right. We're doing a slow draft right now. He can probably chime in on best draft strategies. But I was going to say is 2 versus 9. I would say like just early versus late in the first round. I think probably to me the most obvious and biggest difference is that it's hard to be like more risk averse at the very top than if you get down to like pick 9 because, and I'm just using this as an example. I don't know what the risk level will or won't be, but you probably can't justify, even if you think he's going to be an incredible player on the field this year, taking Alvin Kamara second overall in your draft, right?
Sure.
If he misses 2 games or 4 games or 6 games, and I would encourage you all to check out the Fantasy Field Pass on ESPN Plus right now. Shefty shined some light on that to me in a recent special that we talked through the latest on Alvin Kamara. But if you get to pick 9, well, then you have the opportunity to roll the dice on someone like Alvin Kamara for 2 reasons. Well, one reason most specifically is that if you take Alvin Kamara at 2, you have no idea what the board's going to look like when you come back around to pick 19. If you take Alvin Kamara at 9, you could be like, all right, well, listen, you do the math here. I've got Alvin Kamara at 9. If I want Aaron Jones as well or another top flight running back, do the math. If there are 3 guys you love at running back, one of them is going to be waiting there for you at pick 12. So all of a sudden your running back position is not as much jeopardy as it would be if you take Alvin Kamara at 2. And then there's a massive run of running backs from 3 to 18. And the next thing you know, it's like pick 19 and you're already down to like the 15th running back on the board. You could certainly get a great wide receiver at that point, but you might all of a sudden have a modified 0 RB strategy, which is not what you were thinking of doing when you took Alvin Kamara second overall.
Yep. Part of why you do 170 best ball drafts, Phil, because then you learn how to pivot when you need to pivot.
Smart man, Daniel.
That's just a me thought. All right. When you're looking at teams, Field, we talk about 10-team leagues. That's what our standard game is here, 10-team leagues. But when you're looking at the difference between 10-team leagues, 12-team leagues, when you go into this, how is it that you approach the draft differently? Just by literally adding 2 teams to your league, I feel like there's a fundamental difference in the way that you approach the draft.
A little bit. Other considerations, too, would be, is it 2 wide receivers? Is it 3 wide receivers? That's another big one that tends to be just, you could see, if you play in 10 leagues, you might have 4 with 2 wide receivers and 6 with 3 wide receivers or vice versa. I would say 10 versus 12 doesn't change a whole lot to me. It starts to get a little bit different at 14 or 16, and I do play in a couple of 16-team leagues. So when you get to those really big leagues, I think where it matters is quarterback most, and I would also argue running back, because you can figure it out with a 0 RB strategy in a 10-team league, because if you get to RB 30, like I was down on him earlier, but there's a world that exists that like you bypass running backs and you land with CEH as one of your 2 starters. Like he could be good enough, right? A 16-team league, if you bypass running backs for the first 4 or 5 rounds or 4 rounds, next thing you know, you're drafting like the Jaguars' 3rd-string running back as your top running back in fantasy. And then for quarterbacks, you have to decide going into a draft, what is the cutoff point? And if you have a cutoff point that you designate as the top 14 quarterbacks, when a 16-team league, 2 people are not getting, or at least 2 people are not going to be able to draft one of those 14 that you believe is a starting caliber quarterback. So I think that's where it really matters, is identify the couple of positions where depth is of most concern and maybe prioritize them a tad more than you would. I always say when it comes to big leagues like that, quarterback spot specifically, I don't want to start the train, but I don't want to be the caboose either, right? I want to be somewhere in the middle. And if that means me reaching by a round more than I would like to, all things being equal, I'm okay with it, because the last thing you want in a 16-team league is to have the 18th or 20th or 23rd best quarterback because you just didn't draft correctly.
Any thoughts, Liz?
I mean, I'm just going to admit, new kid, first day of school, I've never done a 10-team league. I've only done 12 to 16. We had our first I had my first draft with the crew last week, and I was like a kid at a bat mitzvah at the candy table when nobody, like parents were gone. I was like filling up all the bags. Look at me getting all these running backs, made the dead zone really approachable.
Right? Yeah.
So I will say, I love what Field, though, is saying about quarterbacks. You always want to start a run. You don't want to finish it. So finding your quarterback spot is key. And I mean, I would also just encourage people to get 2 more friends and make it a tad more difficult.
More difficult.
Yeah.
You like that?
Yeah, just to scale a little bit.
That's fair.
Like Liz is trying to say that do I not have that many friends? I mean,
yeah, seriously.
Don't answer that out loud, please.
No big deal. First day on the show, just taking shots of Field. I love it, though. Let's talk about bye weeks, Liz. Are you paying, when you do your drafts, how much do bye weeks factor into your drafting strategy?
Not at all.
None at all.
Not at all. I'll worry about it then.
Okay.
Kind of a fly by the seat of my pants kind of girl.
Yeah, I would say for the most part, agree. This year, it is worth noting for those that do pay attention to buys that not weeks 9 and 14, you got 6 teams on a buy. So it'll get a little hairy, but what do we talk about all the time right after your draft takes place? just remember the team you draft is not the team you're going to finish with. By week 4, a quarter of your roster could have already been churned. After week 1, you might make 3 waiver wire pickups. Don't worry too much about bye week starting drafts.
Agreed. All right, Rookie Mistakes is presented by Snickers. And Field, I want to ask you, if you're new to fantasy, if you're coming on and you have one piece of advice that you want to give to somebody, hey, don't make this rookie mistake. If you decide you want to play fantasy this year, it's your first time coming into a league, what's your thing?
There are a couple things that come to mind for me. First of all, and I think most people listening to this podcast are well past the point of doing something like this, but if you go to Mike Clay's projections and you see that the quarterbacks are projected for the highest number of points, you'd think, oh, wow,
I should take one of them.
Tom Brady's projected to score even more points than Cooper Kupp. Tom Brady must be more valuable. So we always talk about value-based drafting. It's a big reason why running backs, even if they score less points on average than a wide receiver, will go a little bit higher in drafts and higher than any other position. That's one. Number 2, and this sounds ridiculous, and I know it may be people are probably going to say, like, yeah, no kidding, but just a reminder, don't draft hurt players. Sometimes if something happens that there's some gray area or there's not a definitive stance on how much time that player could miss, like things slide through the cracks. And sometimes websites, wherever you decide to draft, hopefully you're drafting at ESPN, will outsource their medical updates to somebody else, and that company may not have updated that someone got hurt on Thursday night, your draft is on Friday, and it may say, oh, that guy's there's no concern whatsoever. So don't draft hurt players. I think those are probably like the biggest mistakes you see from rookies.
Liz, what do you got?
I think don't double up on tight ends. You don't need a backup tight end. That for me is even if you take a tight end early, and sometimes people late, you don't need to, especially in a 10-team league. My goodness, don't do that.
Yeah.
And also quarterback. I think sometimes there's this thought because we are in such a wonderful, glorious renaissance at the position of signal caller. It's so deep right now, and that is great for the game, and it is great for the sport. But there's this thought that, like, well, I'm going to grab Aaron Rodgers really late, especially in a 10-teamer, right? Like, he might still be on the board, and I can trade him. Ain't nobody going to trade for a quarterback. It is never going to happen. Like, maybe there's a Packers fan that you think you can get to lure into a trade situation. Well, if that were the case, Aaron Rodgers wouldn't be on the board. Nobody's going to trade. There's no packaging, unless we're talking dynasty, for a quarterback. So just don't waste that roster spot when you could pick up a Zamir White or one of these, like an Isaiah Pacheco or George Pickens. Like, you want to have your lotto tickets at the bottom, not something as floor specific as a quarterback.
Totally agree. And I think for me, my big takeaway is, and it's obvious for everybody that's been playing football for a while, fantasy football for a while, but don't draft a defense and a kicker until you get to the end of your draft. Don't look at it as though I got to fill out my starting lineup. And guess what? I'm going to have the best defense and the best kicker. Don't do that. Don't do that. Wait. Draft everywhere else. Running back, wide receiver, everything else that you can do. Wait on defense and kicker. And that's it. Rookie mistakes presented by Snickers. All right. Let's talk about some quarterbacks. Liz, I want to start with you.
Okay.
Who is your quarterback one, and how early are you drafting Josh Allen?
I just don't think I'm going to draft Josh Allen because I am never going to be as passionate about drafting a quarterback before the double-digit rounds, and someone else in my league is going to. And so I just know then that I am going to see what – I also think quarterback, depending on your league – you got to see what falls to you. And I am interested in taking what falls to me, again, because the position is so deep. If I end up with a Kirk Cousins, I'm not pressed about it. If I end up with a Derek Carr, I'm not upset. If I end up with a Jalen Hurts, who's been a regular target of mine, I am very pleased with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Field?
Yeah, so my top 150, I've got Josh Allen at 41, and I have Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes not too far behind. That would be the top of the 5th round. Current average draft position for Josh Allen is 23.3, which means near the top of round 3. So this is the way that I like to look at it, and hopefully people that are listening out there that have been drafting a quarterback early can visualize this and see it the same way themselves. If you draft Josh Allen in round 3, the opportunity cost is who could you have right around there in terms of average draft position at wide receiver, running back, or tight end. Right behind Josh Allen in overall ADP, you have Aaron Jones. Other players that are right around Josh Allen include Mark Andrews, perhaps tight end 1 this year.
Yep.
Keenan Allen, who could be great. Javonte Williams, who has generated a ton of hype this preseason. Now, let's say you bypass Josh Allen. You could wait all the way until pick, I don't have the specific pick in front of me right now, but in the 8th round, you could get somebody like Tom Brady, who I do not believe will have the same number of fantasy points this year as Josh Allen, who has led the position in back-to-back seasons. But I think that Tom Brady will be more than satisfactory at the spot for you this year at quarterback. You could have Tom Brady and Aaron Jones. Meanwhile, if you draft Josh Allen, the running backs that are going around Tom Brady are just far less caliber. They have so much less. Elijah Mitchell as an example. You've got guys behind that. Miles Sanders, Devin Singletary. Would you rather have Josh Allen and his teammate Devin Singletary or Tom Brady and Aaron Jones? I personally would argue that Brady Jones side is preferable.
Oh, it totally makes sense. And it's a big part of being able to break it down to understand when you don't have to mock draft like I do. You could do what Field just did. But a part of it, you take someone there in the 3rd and you see the way the rest of your roster, breaks out and see how much you like it. And that's about a big part of how I have gone about with my quarterback strategy. Because Liz, I'm totally with you. Taking a quarterback so early when you've got so many guys so late. We've been talking about this. Fields got 15 quarterbacks as QB1s this year.
That are 15 quarterbacks that I would be okay with.
Yeah.
No, I have 15 quarterbacks that if I'm in a 10-team league, I think are above 14 is really the number for me. Kirk Cousins is
just outside of that.
Is okay. I think I could stomach it, but I think I would prefer not to. Derek Carr is like my quarterback Mendoza line this year, and he's quarterback 14 on my board. So in a 16-team league, war room league that I play in, for example, like I will try to get one of the guys in my top 14. But I would say, and we'll get into this in a second when we discuss my top tier at quarterback as an example, what I've noticed is that my top tier, there is a dividing line, and the players, there are a couple of guys that are going way ahead of where I have my top tier quarterbacks ranked in my overall top 150, and there are a couple of others that are going way behind where I have them ranked overall in my top 150. As a result of that, I'm much more likely to end up with the back half of my tier 1 as my quarterback than the 2 guys at the very top of my tier 1, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes.
Sure. Liz, when you're talking about your tier 1 of quarterbacks, how deep does that tier go for you?
I mean, I think it's very similar to what Field is saying. I've got Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and Justin Herbert would be the top 4 in that top tier for me. And then we start to separate a little bit into Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray.
Tom Brady. Oh, you're out?
Yeah.
Okay, well, then we have a very different tier 1 then.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Do you hear the, have at it.
And Russell Wilson I'd put in that area as well. And then we start, I would say Tom Brady's I have Russell Wilson ranked 1 spot ahead of Tom Brady. I don't know if we're going to talk about
we can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
I know that people have made bets against Tom Brady for the bulk of his career, and I am not interested in doing that. However, I feel like we've also gotten so used to the narrative of him being the GOAT that we kind of automatically assume that every year is going to top the one that came before. I have a little bit of pause about Tom Brady because we also know, we all know his age, right? Like he's 45, poor guy, could never lie about it at a reunion or anything. But we know because of that, they have completely invested in the trenches, right? Into protecting him because he's not a mobile guy and because he does have an elevated injury risk. Well, Alex Kappa's not there. He went to go protect Joe Burrow, right? Ryan Jensen gets hurt in practice, had to be carted off the field. The center, Tristan Wirfs gets banged up in practice. I don't like these vibes. And Ali Marpet, by the way, actually retired and stayed retired. Rob Gronkowski retires. That's kind of been, the bromance that has helped to, obviously Tom Brady did stuff without Rob Gronkowski, but that kind of helped to buoy the relationship and the production. So I just feel like the vibe, and Tom Brady has a job for the first time ever set after he's done with this year of football. There's a foot out of the game. This is a different scenario. This is a different situation. Mathematically speaking, I still have him ranked in my top, 7. But personally, if I'm being transparent about the way I'm drafting, I'm avoiding him. I don't want him. Do I think Kirk Cousins is going to outproduce Tom Brady? I think it's a real possibility because I don't know that Tom Brady is going to stay on the field for 17 weeks.
Wow, interesting. I mean, I don't have any durability concerns. He's obviously only missed one. He's only missed time due to injury once in his career when he had a freak. He tore an ACL on a hit that's obviously been outlawed since then. So I'm not concerned about durability at all personally. I've got Brady right there in my top tier of quarterbacks. I've got 5 guys. So it's in order. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, and Tom Brady. The case for Brady is over the past 2 seasons since joining the Bucs, he's got 10,000 passing yards. He's got 83 touchdown passes, so over 40 in each of those 2 years. Last year, he had more top two quarterback finishing weeks than any other player in the NFL. He had, he had 8 top 5 finishes, also the most amongst all quarterbacks. He had 11 top 10 finishes, also the most amongst quarterbacks. I think the offensive line injuries specific to the interior probably only make this Bucs team that much more likely to throw it more because they might not be able to run it as effectively. And they've got an embarrassment of riches amongst pass catchers. Even without Gronk, Brady is about to trot out a top 5 of pass catchers of Chris Godwin when he's healthy, and it sounds like there's a chance to be ready for week 1. Mike Evans, who's the only player in NFL history with 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons to begin his career. Russell Gage, who got $10 million a year. Julio Jones, who, if anybody can bring him back from the dead, it's probably Tom Brady, right? And then, there are guys who probably won't even make this roster who could start elsewhere. So I'm not worried about Tom Brady this year. I know that the eventual proverbial cliff could come for Tom Brady. He's been bucking the trend. He's been defying the age odds for a decade and a half now. I'm not worried. I've got it in my tier 1.
Okay, so with all of this, I mean, you guys are talking up a whole bunch of quarterbacks here that are more in the top end of the quarterbacks, even if they're just top 7. But all offseason, we've talked about weight on quarterback. If we're talking these guys up so much, why is it that we're waiting on quarterback, Liz? What's the strategy reason for waiting and not taking someone so early?
Well, it's what Field touched on earlier, right? Like you can just get more positional value from a different position at around where a lot of people are reaching for quarterback. And so you can maximize the amount of points available to you, the production available to you, because there are so many elite quarterbacks. I mean, the position is so deep. So the point differential between, let's say, Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers is going to be rather minimal if we're looking at projections than the difference between an Aaron Jones you mentioned and a Elijah Mitchell, right? I would rather have Aaron Jones and his likely 60 catches with Aaron Rodgers than Elijah Mitchell, we talked about at the top of the show, right? And his 5 weeks on the sidelines.
So, Field, you mentioned this because in that, we just had a list up on the screen. Quarterbacks 11 through 16. In there, you've got 2 AFC West quarterbacks and Derek Carr and Russell Wilson. And you've got a Super Bowl winning champion and Matthew Stafford, who almost threw for 5,000 yards last year. I mean, if there's a reason to wait, I feel like just looking at this list, there's possibility
How is
here.
Justin Fields not on this list, by the way?
He is probably around 18, 19, 20. That makes sense to me. But let's take it a step further. So when you're comparing the 10th highest scoring quarterback last year on a points per game basis was Kyler Murray, 21.5 fantasy points per game.
Okay.
So he was quote unquote the floor of a 10-team league starting quarterback. Obviously there were leagues in which other quarterbacks that were lower scoring than Kyler were started because somebody rostered 2 or whatever it was, right? Sure. But that's the floor. Now do the same thing for the 20th highest scoring running back, because at quarterback, there's only one that starts per week. So you have to look at where is the 20th best running back in comparison to the top running back. Where is the 20th best running back in comparison to Jonathan Taylor? Kyler Murray got you 21.5 fantasy points per game as the 10th best quarterback, as quote unquote, the worst starting quarterback in a 10-team league. The 20th best running back on a points per game basis, I'm just telling you, is not going to be nearly as successful as Kyler Murray is in fantasy. So this is really about supply and demand and how you're starting one guy at one position and potentially 3 at the other. And beyond that, quarterbacks, generally speaking, have better durability. And the other reality is that if you draft a quarterback and he fails you early, the numbers tell us that they're going to end up being somewhere between 12 and 15 per year that are good enough to start in a 10-team league. And there's not going to be nearly as many useful waiver wire options amongst running backs starting from week 1. There might be a couple James Robinsons here or there, but for the most part, last year, Cordarrelle Patterson was probably the best example, but it wasn't like we had 6 running backs that we didn't know about going into the season. You could just grab off the waiver wire. So quarterback is the one spot where you can wait. Not that the guys at the top aren't going to be great, but you can wait and get a totally fine option who may not win you your league, but he certainly won't be the reason you lose your league.
Yeah.
To contextualize what you said, number 20 running back last year, David Montgomery, averaged just under 12 points per week. So that's a 10-point basically differential between Kyler Murray and David Montgomery per week.
Heck yeah. Yeah. All right. Earlier last week, Field and I talked about our quarterback breakouts and busts. Liz, I'm curious, do you have anybody that you have as either a sleeper, a breakout, or a bust here at the quarterback position for this year?
Well, I mentioned Kirk Cousins because I do think he could flirt with 4,500 passing yards and 40 touchdowns. I love Kevin O'Connell. And the McVay-esque up-tempo system that he's bringing to Minnesota. But I don't think that that's particularly interesting or deep. So this is my first show. Let's go a little bit deeper. I mentioned Justin Fields. I was like, where's Justin Fields on this list? Oh my gosh, the upside is so evident. To me, Justin Fields at his ceiling is Jalen Hurts 2021. And if you look at their situations, really, really similar. Here's an incredible rusher with some questions in the passing game who has his number one wide receiver, is a deep threat who a speed guy, frankly, who isn't really an alpha number one and probably shouldn't be playing that position. And a tight end who's going to see a lot of volume and might not have the best hands in the red area of the field. When I look at that and what Jalen Hurts had to work with last year, I see a lot of overlap. And I think Justin Fields is likely to pass the ball, maybe only 28 times on average per game. But could he carry the ball 8 times per game? Absolutely. I don't see him because of the O-line differences. Now, Philly has like a top 15 O-line, and the Bears have really tried to reinforce the trenches. We'll see if any of that gels. I don't see Justin Fields maybe finding the end zone as regularly as Jalen Hurts did last year.
Sure.
But I'll take the over on like 5.5 rushing touchdowns on Justin Fields. The upside there, really nice.
Currently going as quarterback at 19. He is being drafted outside the top 160, so he's basically free right now in ESPN drafts. All right. Field, tell us about a little something from our friends over at Geico.
You know, I have a question for you, Liz. It actually comes from Geico. How would you love a chance to save some money on insurance?
Sounds great.
Okay, it would be awesome. You would love it. After all, who doesn't love a great deal, right? And when it comes to great rates on insurance for all the things in your life, Geico can help. Like with insurance for your car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and RV. You could even help with homeowners, condo, or renters coverage. You could save even more with a special discount when you bundle your coverages. Plus, add the easy-to-use Geico mobile app, available 24-hour roadside assistance, and more. And choosing to switch to Geico becomes an easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways you could save with great rates and discounts. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com to get a rate quote or contact your local agent and get started seeing how much you could save.
Certain people just make my life so much easier. I don't know what I'd do without them. It's like if you own a growing business and you need a hire, ZipRecruiter makes hiring so much easier because they do the work for you. And right now you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/FFF. ZipRecruiter uses powerful technology to find and match the right candidates with your job. You can easily review these recommended candidates and invite your top choices to apply. Additionally, ZipRecruiter has a complete suite of tools that make it easy to filter, review, and rate all of your candidates. In fact, the hardest thing you have to do is remember our special URL. It's ZipRecruiter.com/FFF. That's where you go to try ZipRecruiter for free. Once again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/FFF. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, guys, coming back out, and we're going to transition over to running backs, where the main question everybody is asking at the top of the board, Jonathan Taylor or CMC at 1.01. Liz, I'm going to start with you. Which side are you going here?
You know, I actually think Liz should be the next party in because she has somebody that's not even in this question.
Does she?
Ahead of CMC, right? You've said this before. You're ahead on Austin Eckler.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that from our Twitter spaces. That
so let me make the Jonathan Taylor Christian McCaffrey thing is actually not that difficult. It really isn't. At his peak, Christian McCaffrey is a better fantasy football player than John. He's the best player in fantasy football, and it's not close. It's just a fact. Christian McCaffrey is different than every other player in the NFL. If you go look at his points per game average since 2018, Christian McCaffrey, 27.5 points per game. I threw away just a couple of games in there when he got hurt early, but that also underscores the important part, is that Christian McCaffrey has missed way too much time over the past 2 years. So if on week 8 of this season, you do not have Christian McCaffrey available, how much more ticked off would you be at yourself than if something happens to Jonathan Taylor? Sure. Jonathan Taylor is going to have probably a top 2 workload in terms of total touches. He's going to have enough involvement in the passing game. It's a run-oriented offense. It really comes down to this. Like, these guys are both incredible. The ceiling for Christian McCaffrey is higher. The risk is greater. That's as simple as it comes down to.
Yeah.
But I think so, at least. Liz thinks there's somebody who's not being included in this conversation who should be.
I think Austin Eckler is my RB2. I mean, I am not trusting Christian McCaffrey. He's played 10 games over the past 2 years. Yes, when he's on the field, he's great. But we have also, the amount of data that we've been given is that he is not capable of staying on the field given the workload that Carolina expects him to perform with. He cannot do it. Austin Eckler on the other side, though, always says, please don't give me the ball 20 times. I don't want to touch the ball 20, 25 times, 30 times. I talked to him when Isaiah Spiller was drafted, and he said, thank goodness someone else is there to spell me regularly. He likes the rookie. He likes being able to stay on the field to be effective. Now, is he going to score 20 touchdowns again this year? Probably not, because everybody's favorite word in fantasy, regression. So yes, we are anticipating a regression, but I would take a lesser Austin Eckler for 16 or 17 weeks. Remember last year, he only missed one game, not because of a soft tissue issue, not because of any sort of injury, but because of COVID. And as Field mentioned earlier, he did hurt himself. He had a hamstring tweak at the preseason and still managed to stay healthy. I think there's a self-awareness situation here. I think there is, whether it's internally or throughout the organization, he is not the engine through which everything flows for the Chargers, and he's attached to an absolutely incredible offense, field stretchers, a quarterback. Christian McCaffrey doesn't have any of those things.
Yeah, but he definitely, I think the pushback is that he didn't have those things in previous years, and he was literally way better than any other player in fantasy.
Fair.
Christian McCaffrey's been unlucky the past 2 years. So how much do you buy into the idea of him being perpetually vulnerable to injury going forward? And if you believe that because of the past 2 seasons, it means that CMC is a great enough injury risk to avoid taking him with a top 2 pick, I understand. Like, fantasy football is not just practicality, it's emotion. But if you think that he's just gotten unlucky because prior to that, he had never missed a game due to injury, he only missed one during college other than when he opted out of the bowl game. Like, Christian McCaffrey was this ultra workhorse, super durable until he wasn't. So you have to decide how much credence to put into things like this player is invincible, doesn't miss time, versus this guy is always hurt. It's really a personal choice. I think it's pretty simple, though. The risk is greater. The reward is far greater as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Still a guy, though, that you guys see as a tier 1 running back in spite of all of the injury risk.
I've got him at RB2, so I do.
RB2.
Yep.
Who else do you guys have? Liz, I'm going to start with you. Who else do you have in your tier 1 of running backs?
So I have Jonathan Taylor, Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey, and then I have Dalvin Cook. And then I have a break for my next tier with Derrick Henry. I'm a little bit worried about Derrick Henry, not just because of the injury, but because if you look at his broken tackle percentage rate prior to the injury had decreased significantly and has decreased. His efficiency has decreased significantly over the past 3 years. And so I would say even prior to the big injury, it was volume that was keeping him alive, keeping him abundant in terms of production, and that efficiency has waned ahead of the injury.
Yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry definitely has been the king of volume from the running back position. Does he make your tier 1 here?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've got a 6-man tier for my tier 1 of running backs. It's Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry, Najee Harris, and Dalvin Cook in that order. And
Najee Harris is in mine as well.
Najee Harris so I'll just go quickly through them. Jonathan Taylor, we know what's going on there. Christian McCaffrey, talked about Austin Eckler. But Derrick Henry, the guy still finished in the top 10 in rushing after missing more than half the season last year. Like, he may not get a ton of passing game volume relative to Christian McCaffrey, but he's going to have more carries than anybody else in the NFL, and he is by far the best touchdown maker in the league. So I have him as running back 4, and I might be too low. Najee Harris led all running backs in catches last year. The efficiency was bad. It may be bad again this year, but if he gets 70-plus catches again this season, he'll return value. Dalvin Cook has been unlucky with touchdowns in recent seasons, but very good in the passing game, and I think this offense is prepared to score a lot of points, so I've got Dalvin Cook in my top 6 as well.
Field, Liz and I have been really rocking the crisscross applesauce here, and we noticed that you just haven't really
I don't know if
I
can kind of like
all game. Can you get your legs up there?
I'm not quite as
Jeans can't quite do it.
Look at those
as mobile.
Look at that.
Yeah,
That's all right. I
Not
appreciate
very
you trying, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
I got old bones.
You're the youngest one out of all of us here, aren't you? Aren't you like 16?
Maybe.
All right. Anyways, let's talk about a couple other running backs here, because if you look at the top tier of the running back room, we've talked about how those guys, far and away, the reason why you want to be at the top of your draft, to grab those guys that are the workhorses. 8 of the top 12 running backs in ADP last season finished top 12. So 75% of them finished where they were drafted inside of that top 12%, in that top 12 pick. Are you okay with going running back to start your draft, understanding how valuable those running backs are, but how potentially weak it could leave you at the wide receiver position? Liz, I'm going to start with you.
Not in a PPR format.
Not in a PPR league. Even with heavy pass catching running backs, you would probably prefer to stay.
I really like the anchor running back strategy. I really want to land on some of that elite wide receiver talent. And again, I don't know, like the space between, let's say, Javonte Williams and Breece Hall.
Sure.
Right? Like, what is the space between? We know Melvin Gordon is still available, and I understand there's concern about Breece Hall because, he's attached to a questionable quarterback and a bad team, et cetera. But I think Field made a brilliant point about Najee Harris, who bucked all of those trends last year, despite being behind, being attached to Ben Roethlisberger and behind a bad O-line and a not particularly efficient offense.
DeAndre
right?
Swift was a number 3 running back with Jared Goff as his quarterback
There
to the
you go.
11 healthy games last year.
So what's the space between really Nick Chubb, who we know is only going to see 16 carries a game, as frustrating as it may be, whether Dearness Johnson is part of the equation or whether Kareem Hunt is on? Or do you know, I did this stat, I ran these numbers myself, not on a TI-81, but on my phone calculator, that when Kareem Hunt was off the field, when Kareem Hunt was off of the field last season, Nick Chubb averaged 16.1 carries per game. And when Kareem Hunt was on the field, he averaged 16.3 carries per game.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
weird, huh? Yeah.
You know what the number's going to be. And I think we're pretty much expecting Cleveland to be run heavy and follow a similar blueprint with the backfield this season.
So is the question, how likely or am I comfortable?
Oh,
Boy, are you?
So I think it's on the bottom of the screen, it's how likely. And I think you asked Liz, are you comfortable? Am I comfortable? Absolutely, I am. I'm totally comfortable taking back-to-back running backs.
Are you likely to do it then?
Am I likely? Not to fence it, but it always depends how the board shakes
Yeah, I
out.
was gonna
All
say.
things being equal, my preference would be to get 2 elite running backs with my first 2 picks. All things being equal. But I play in a lot of fantasy leagues, and if I were playing just one league, that would be my preference. If I play in a bunch of leagues, no, of course I'm going to adopt different draft strategies. But if I were playing in just one league, my preference would be to walk away with 2 elite running backs and with my first 2 picks, which that might be one of those where you do get some benefit if you pick 8th or 9th or 10th, because I think within the first 12 picks, there will be 2 elite running backs available.
Yeah, absolutely. And so from that, we've talked about taking 2 off the top. Liz, you've talked about the anchor running back where you grab one stud guy up front and then you sort of wait. How about 0 running back strategy? Are either of you interested, or do you ever implement a 0 running back strategy when it comes to drafting? Field?
I do, yeah. On occasion, again, sometimes it's how the board shakes out. But if I end up with a late first-round pick and I snag a wide receiver and then I have the opportunity to draft a Travis Kelce or a Mark Andrews, that's an example of how I lean into the 0 RB strategy, because you've just loaded up with, it's hard to say no to, I'm just, again, making this up, Justin Jefferson at 8, and then you get Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews at, 13. Mm-hmm. Hard to say no to that start right there. But then if you whip back around at pick 28, well, if and a pristine wide receiver option is still there, Mike Evans or Keenan Allen is sitting there, then maybe. So, I would say that generally speaking, my strategy is to not have a strategy going into the draft.
Sure.
Like, I'm not intentionally going 0 RB. I'm not intentionally going RB. It's always about playing the board. But a 0 RB strategy has some serious merit, and we sort of outlined some of the stuff that was pertinent last week when we talked with Mike about it. But, the idea is that, like, you're going to have to take you may end up sort of stashing a handful of them later on in the draft, but you just have to be nimble. You have to probably guess right on maybe one of your running back picks, and then you're going to have to play the waiver wire, sort of like a slot machine. And It requires some attention, but, if something happens in Washington and all of a sudden J.D. McKissic every single week has 7 targets per game, that's an example of a guy that would not be a target if you were using a traditional pounce on running back early strategies. But if you go 0 RB and you have a guy that, even if he gets 5 rushes a game, if his passing game usage is good enough, you can make do.
Yeah. If you wait until the 5th, 6th round right now, you could take Zeke, David Montgomery, J.K. Dobbins, Breece Hall. I don't know how late you want to wait, but if you load up on wide receiver talent early, you work the waiver wire. Also, let's not forget, as a part of this whole thing, trades is such a massively underrated part of fantasy, and the art of the trade is a huge thing. If you get the right guys early, that's a part of how you can help your team if you implement that strategy. All right, let's talk about some RB2s. It's easy at the top of the board, although there are some question marks.
Yeah.
But once you get into this RB2, the question marks become a lot bigger and a lot stronger. So, Liz, I'm going to start with you. Do you have a favorite RB2 target in that like 12 to 18 to 20 range?
Give me Cam Akers all day long.
Love it.
I am buying the dip on Cam Akers. A lot of people I've heard auto fade, Achilles injury. He came back in like 5 to 6 months. It was absolutely stunning what he did.
Yeah.
Also, I talked about Kyle Shanahan not being able to help himself. Sean McVay can't either. And
Yes.
what's his Cam Akers is absolutely Sean McVay's guy. He was anointed after Todd Gurley went out at the end of what was that 2019. Past 2 years have been a little bit fuzzy, I think, for all of us,
for
right?
everybody. Yep. Yep.
And also, Daryl Henderson, right? Daryl Henderson getting his job like given away. He was not the number one by any means. Sony Michel coming in there, taking more weighted opportunities towards the end. And so I feel like Cam Akers is absolutely also, we want a running back attached to an incredible. I had someone on Twitter say, like, why are you so high on Cam Akers? My answers were Sean McVay, Matt Stafford, the offense. Done and done.
Yeah. Field, you have any RB2s that you really like?
I think all the players going in that range, my answer was going to be Cam Akers, so I'll double down on that. I actually am okay with pretty much all the values there. Zeke is another one as well, just because Zeke, even if no longer sort of capital Z, Zeke Elliott, going to score probably 8 touchdowns this year, going to pile up 1,200 total yards, and we've been actually not talking that much about durability other than the CMC context. Zeke is on the field almost all the time. He is a guy that, again, if you believe in it or you don't, that's up to you, but he's got the largest sample size amongst these running backs of staying on the field absent when he got suspended.
Absolutely. We're going to wrap up this running back conversation in just a second, but first, a word from our friends over at Vivid Seats. The 2022 football season is almost here, and you can be there to catch all the action live with Vivid Seats. Get out to the stadium and experience every touchdown, sideline grab, and game-winning drive, and with Vivid Seats rewards, you'll start earning free tickets from your very first purchase. Buy 10 tickets, get the 11th one free. That's like getting 10% back on every single ticket. From the box seats to the bleachers, Vivid Seats has you covered with tickets at great prices all season long. Just visit vividseats.com or download the app today. Vivid Seats. Life happens live. Phil Jays, tell us about NerdWallet.
When it comes to choosing the top RB, wide receiver, QB, or even which defense is right for your team on any given week, you know where to turn. But when you're trying to decide on the right credit card for your wallet, the right mortgage lender for your dream home, or the right savings account, where do you go? The nerds at NerdWallet are here to help you make a smart financial decision. NerdWallet is a personal finance site run by money nerds. Think people as obsessed about personal finance as we are about fantasy sports. Who wants to share their knowledge with our listeners to help them find the right financial products for them? Let's say you're looking for a new rewards credit card. NerdWallet can help you compare cashback cards side by side, so you can feel confident choosing the one that suits your spending. Think of them like your weekly wide receiver PPR rankings, but you're comparing top credit cards that work for you. NerdWallet, the smartest decision for all your financial decisions.
All right, we're going to start taking some questions from our YouTube chat. This first one comes from North Providence Store, wants to know, and it's in all caps lock, so I'm going to just say, top breakout player this season. Liz, do you have a top breakout player this season?
I'm really in love with Nico Collins and his potential, his potentiality.
But is it a real word?
It is.
Man, I feel so... I had no idea. It sounds like a made-up word that I would have heard Matthew use on this show. That's why I'm always used to words not being real. That's why.
No, it is real. I Googled it after because
Okay.
you got in my head about it. But Nico Collins, I absolutely love. I have a great red zone weapon, going to work opposite the field of Brandon Cooks, obviously. You know Brandon Cooks is good for 1,000 yards. I don't know how he's going to get them, but he always manages to do it. I have Nico Collins slated for 6 touchdowns this season, like 65 catches, 650 yards, 6 touchdowns. Like, I think the potential there is really evident. And I think Davis Mills is clearly the future, at least what they want right now. And his efficiency numbers, Davis Mills, were not as horrible. Also, Pap Hamilton, like he's been attached to some pretty good quarterbacks, right? Andrew Luck, I believe, pretty talented. Justin Herbert up there as well. Yeah.
Yep.
So I like that as I also really like to dig for gold in some of these considered, quote, bad offenses and see what's available there because, you know, generally there's a lot of question marks and that depresses ADP. But to me, Nico Collins is a really nice late round potential breakout.
Love it. Field, do you have someone?
Gabe Davis, another name that keeps coming to mind, potential breakout. And I said this whenever we did our Bills Double Trouble recently and then other conversations. Don't overthink this one. Sometimes we rely upon previous numbers to help us with our projections. Sometimes you have to just look at the player involved, the offense involved, and we're talking about the number 2 wide receiver, I believe, in a Buffalo Bills offense that could score north of 30 points per game. Josh Allen could easily surpass 40 passing touchdowns. Super talented, great in the red zone, got plenty of size. Not a fast guy like Stephon Diggs level of fast, but good enough to potentially challenge for 10 touchdowns or more, over 1,000 yards. Gabe Davis is my pick for breakout wide receiver, and really, you can make the case for him as one of the breakout players, period, in fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a guy that started, we've watched him, this draft process. He's just moved up and moved up and moved up, skyrocketed up those boards, but still someone that we think there's going to have a great fantasy season this year. Another question we have comes from Dustin Dockery. Would you trade Juju Smith-Schuster for A.J. Dillon? PPR league. I realize it's tough in a vacuum. You don't know the rest of the roster. The roster construction matters, but Juju Smith-Schuster and the unknown of being the wide receiver 1 in that offense, or A.J. Dillon?
I would prefer A.J. Dillon.
Running backs, just in general?
I think that the ceiling is much greater for Juju Smith-Schuster, but you also could find there are a lot of wide receivers that we could find to be useful this year, right? The number of lottery tickets at wide receiver far exceeds the number of lottery tickets at running back. So at this point of the process, my preference would be A.J. Dillon.
Particularly in that wide receiver 3 glut of options, right? Like there are 20 wide receiver 3s, from wide receiver. What's the difference really between like wide receiver 28 and wide receiver 40 in terms of probable outcomes?
I don't think there is one.
Right.
Yeah. Like on any given week, they're all sort of in that same spot. So we have one last question. This one comes from Brennan Grant. Who would be the best top 3 picks in a 3-keeper league?
The best top 3 picks in a 3-keeper league?
Yeah, let's say you're keeping 3 people. Damien, you want to jump in with this?
No, I think that sounds right. I mean, I think there are a couple of ways to look at this. So if the idea is that like you have the opportunity to keep these 3 players every single season.
So who are the top 3 players?
It's almost like who are the top 3 players in Dynasty. And I think you're probably looking at some combination of, my guess would be Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and either Jonathan Taylor or insert your third favorite wide receiver here. Be my guess.
Yeah. No
Maybe
quarterback unless it's a 2-quarterback league, correct?
Yeah, I would think so. If you can keep the 3 guys every single year, but if the option is to keep them just for this upcoming year, then my answers would be Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, and Austin Eckler, the first 3 players on my overall board.
Yeah.
But if you get to keep them every single year going forward, then treat it like a sort of semi-quasi dynasty league. It's the 2 young wideouts from LSU to start.
It's fair.
Agreed.
All right. That's going to wrap it up for us. That's all for our YouTube questions. Liz, you survived your first show. How does it feel?
I'm not sweating, so that's good.
Good for you.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
All right.
That's what it's all about.
Marathon tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Be there.
So much stuff. On E1 Field, I'm told.
ESPN 1, 7 p.m. Eastern time for 4 straight hours. Liz, you crushed it. You're welcome back anytime. Maybe see you in the next couple of days.
Yeah.
Hopefully
there you
we
go.
do.
Watch ESPN. You'll see plenty of Liz Loza. That, to me, feels like a win.
Dude, this was such a fun show.
Do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, let's do it again tomorrow. We'll see you guys on Tuesday. All right. That was not bad. Liz, you did. I think you had a solid B+, A- for a show.
B plus A minus,
B
I'll
plus
take
A
it.
minus. What kind of harsh grader are you? Jeez.
So you got to start low. You
Well,
can't
because
just
my
give an A
brain
right off
froze
the
when I couldn't
bat.
remember Cam Akers' name.
If I give an A,
forgot
it's
Tom
just
Brady's name
downhill. I want to
recently,
have
so
room for
don't feel
uphill.
bad.
Liz, you did awesome.
Thank you.
You're incredible.
I did not. It was interesting. David's outline, I did not read the second page of.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I was like, oh, look at all this. I got back to the hotel a little bit late last night.
There's a little bit here.
Yeah, there's